Thanks to cell phones and social media, it's easier than ever to talk to people all over the world whenever you want to, obviously, but it's not working exactly as you would expect. Today's teenagers are the loneliest generation in American history. In 2017, for example, teens met with friends 68 fewer times than they did in 1990. Children have fewer friends, but more anxiety. They have fewer dates, but more depression. Suicide rates are rising. So what is causing all this? We put that question to one of the smartest people we know, Johann Hari, author of the book Lost Connections, Why You're Depressed and How to Find Hope. Here's what he said. So this is one of those results that's the opposite of what was predicted, maybe opposite of what you would have expected. Why is this happening?
I wanted to think about this a lot. So for my book, Lost Connections, I went to the first ever internet rehab center in the world. It's just outside Spokane in Washington. I remember when I arrived feeling really annoyed. I stepped out of the car and feeling really annoyed I couldn't check my cell phone. It wasn't working. And I was like, oh, right, you're in the right place. So it was a really fascinating place. And I remember spending a lot of time there. They get a huge range of people in this internet rehab center, but they disproportionately get young men who've become obsessed with these multiplayer role-player games like World of Warcraft. I remember talking to the woman who runs this center, Dr. Hilary Cash, and her saying to me, you've got to ask yourself, what are these young men getting out of these games? They're getting the things they used to get from the culture, but they no longer get. They get a sense of a tribe. They get a sense of an identity. They get a sense they're good at something. They get a sense they're actually roaming around because American kids now barely leave the house. But what they're getting really is a kind of parody of those things. The more time I spent there talking to people who become completely obsessed with social media or video games, and the more I spoke to the social scientists who study this, I began to realize I think the connection between social media and social life is a bit like the connection between pornography and sex. I'm not totally against pornography, but if your entire sex life consisted of looking at pornography, you'd be going around irritated and frustrated the whole time, because that's not what we evolved for. We didn't evolve to look at screens for sex, and we didn't evolve to interact through screens. We evolved to interact face to face. And when you have a huge decline in that, that leads to a big increase in depression and anxiety. It's partly a symptom, right? Actually, loneliness had been supercharged already before the internet arrived. Part of what happens is the internet arrives and it looks a lot like the things we've lost, right? You've lost friends, well, here's some Facebook friends. You've lost status in the economy, here's some status updates. But it's not the thing we've lost. It's not filling the hole there.
So if young people, and young men specifically, have lost a sense of identity and tribe and meaning and purpose and the kind of useful risk that young men need, don't we have a whole generation that's ripe for a demagogue to show up and say, here's an identity, here's a purpose, here's some risk? I mean, this is a perilous situation for a society, isn't it?
Absolutely. One of the things that really shocked me for the book that I learned is there's scientific evidence for 9 different causes of depression and anxiety, and there's one that I think really relates to your question, Tucker. So everyone knows that junk food has taken over our diets and made us physically sick, but there's equally strong evidence that a kind of junk values have taken over our minds and made us mentally sick. For thousands of years, philosophers have said, if you think life is about money and status and showing off and thinking all the time about how you look to other people, you're going to feel like crap, right? That's not an exact quote from Confucius, but that is the gist of what he said. But weirdly, nobody had scientifically investigated this until an incredible man I got to know called Professor Tim Kasser. And he discovered 2 really important things. Firstly, the more you think life is about money and status and showing off, the things that social media trains you to do, the things advertising trains you to do, the more likely you are to become depressed and anxious. And secondly, as a society, we have become much more driven by these junk values over time. There's been a really big increase. But there's also really hopeful things there. Professor Kasser showed relatively small interventions can really help. So he did a program where you just get teenagers and their parents to meet in a group once every couple of weeks for 4 months to just talk about moments they have actually found meaningful in their lives, right? Not buying Nike sneakers, not how many likes they got on Instagram, but meaningful moments. And they keep checking in to show, okay, how can we build more of our lives about seeking those meaningful things and less about all this junk that culture is constantly pumping us full of? And just doing that led to a really significant